in the crosshairs of the past. Chapter 1: Shadow from the Past. In 20 years of service in the Marine Corps, I learned one simple truth: coincidences exist only in fairy tales and cheap detective novels. When Evan Blackwood appeared in our sleepy town of Pine Ridge after 12 years of absence, I felt it in my skin, that cold, sticky sensation of impending trouble. A sniper's instincts never rust. By 40, Mike Rayner, had built the life I'd always dreamed of. The best gun shop in the county, a beautiful wife Christy, a cozy house on the outskirts of town, my little outpost of tranquility after years of war. And now the shadows of the past threatened to destroy everything I had created. I saw it in the uninvited guest's eyes, a carefully thought-out plan with a single purpose: to destroy me. The July morning covered Montana with a wave of scorching heat. The hot air shimmered above the asphalt in front of my store-accurate shot, like mirages in the desert. The industrial air conditioner hummed laboriously, hopelessly trying to defeat the heat. The glass display cases housing rifles and pistols had fogged up from the inside, turning into frosted canvases. I ran a cloth over the glass, revealing the polished beauty of a Remington 700. The metal caressed my fingers with its coolness, the only real relief from the heat. I knew every weapon in my shop by heart, could identify the tiniest defects by touch, could disassemble and reassemble any model with my eyes closed. These weren't just merchandise. They were my religion, my world. Old Will Gorman watched me with the respect of a man who understands the value of a good tool. His faded plaid shirt, like his face, told the story of 40 years spent under the merciless Montana sun, stories I read without asking questions. See these notches? I slowly ran my fingertip along the sight rail. There was nothing artificial in my voice, only genuine admiration for a well-made thing. They compensate for crosswinds up to 30 meters per second. In your mountain valleys, such drift can become a problem, especially when those brazen wolves approach the herds. Gorman nodded, the wrinkles on his face spreading like a spider web. After they tore up 3 of my sheep last week, I realized my old Winchester isn't cutting it anymore. Eyes aren't what they used to be, hands either. I grunted understandingly. Behind these simple words lay an entire story, the story of a man who all his life trusted only himself and his weapon. Such people don't buy rifles to hang them on the wall. They need a reliable partner in their daily struggle for survival. Sunlight breaking through the tall windows played on the glass display cases with ammunition. Colorful boxes lined up in perfect order, from tiny .22 LR to massive .50 BMG. I squinted when a sunbeam, reflecting off polished metal, hit me directly in the eyes, like a sniper scope from a distant hill. The doorbell, an antique, brass one, left from the times when the premises housed a hardware store, chimed melodiously. Christy appeared in the doorway with a tray bearing 2 steaming cups of coffee. At 33, she was the embodiment of beauty. Red hair, cut in a stylish bob, framed a face sprinkled with freckles, green eyes that looked at the world with eternal surprise and the joy of an artist. A strict business suit the color of clotted cream only emphasized her graceful figure. A silver brooch in the shape of a deer glinted on her lapel, our family talisman of luck. "Missed breakfast again," she gently reproached, placing the tray on the glass counter. In our business, she handled the accounting and artistic design of the shop. The displays and advertising posters created by her hands attracted customers, no less than my reputation as an expert. Her presence transformed a typical men's store into a place where people came not only for weapons, but also for a special atmosphere. "Was checking the new batch of optics," I smiled guiltily, accepting the cup. The coffee smelled of cardamom, Christie's favorite spice, her little quirk that made each sip special. "He was checking optics," she mimicked, shaking her head. The morning light turned her hair into a fiery waterfall. "I heard you tinkering in the basement until 3 in the morning. By the way, bacon and eggs are wonderful only when hot. Cold fried eggs are a culinary crime. Will Gorman chuckled quietly, observing our banter. Such moments probably reminded him of his own youth, of a time when everything was simpler. He discreetly coughed, bringing us back to reality. I caught myself. I apologize, Mr. Gorman. So, about the rifle. I can offer an optical sight with variable magnification. Wolves often attack at dusk, and visibility is poor. I'll take it, the farmer nodded, pulling out a worn leather wallet. My grandson's coming for summer vacation soon. Time to teach the boy how to handle a real weapon. While I processed the purchase documents, Christie had managed to wipe the display cases and set out a new collection of hunting knives with maple handles, her latest idea, which took 3 weekends of wood carving. Our family tandem worked like a precise mechanism. Each knew their role, each valued the other's role. 4 years of marriage had taught us to move in unison, to understand each other with half a word, with half a glance. The bell chimed again. A tall figure froze in the doorway, a man in a perfectly tailored suit the color of a storm cloud. The tray in Christie's hands trembled, the cups clinked plaintively. Hot coffee spilled across the glass surface of the counter, but she seemed not to notice. Her face paled so suddenly, as if someone had turned off the light inside. The man took a step forward. The sun behind his back momentarily transformed him into a black silhouette, devoid of features, a figure from a nightmare. Then he stepped into the light and I saw his face, handsome, confident, with a slight half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. The eyes remained cold like mountain lakes in January. "Hello, Chris," he said. His voice sounded like expensive whiskey, soft, velvety, enveloping, with a slight huskiness that made women lose their heads. "Long time no see." I managed to catch the tray a fraction of a second before it slipped from my wife's suddenly weakened fingers. She stood motionless, like a deer in headlights. A heavy silence hung in the shop, broken only by the measured hum of the air conditioner. Even the usually talkative Will Gorman froze, instinctively sensing that he had witnessed something important, something dangerous. The evening was humid, as if electrified. We sat on the porch of our small house on the outskirts of Pine Ridge, sipping iced tea. I observed Christie. She seemed detached, immersed in some internal dialogue. Her fingers nervously twisted the misty glass, leaving wet marks on the wooden table. "You've been off all day," I finally said, breaking the prolonged silence. "Is it because of that man in the shop?" Christie flinched, as if waking from a deep trance. For a moment, something like fear flashed in her eyes, but she quickly composed herself. "His name is Evan," she said quietly. "Evan Blackwood. 12 years ago, we were supposed to get married." I slowly set down my glass. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. A storm was approaching, so common in Montana valleys on summer evenings. The first raindrops drummed on the wooden porch roof, bringing with them the smell of wet pine needles and the promise of coolness. "We met in art college," Christie continued, looking somewhere into the distance as if seeing pictures of the past there. "He was studying architecture, I was studying applied arts. He was bright, talented, with big plans. All the girls on campus were crazy about him, but he chose me." She smiled bitterly. "It seemed like a miracle, you know, like I was in a fairy tale." Lightning streaked across the sky, momentarily illuminating her face with a ghostly light. I could see how difficult these memories were for her, but I didn't interrupt. Some stories need to be told in full to be free from their power. A week before the wedding, he disappeared, just vanished into thin air. No explanations, no notes. His phone didn't answer, his apartment emptied overnight. Even his parents didn't know where he'd gone. Her voice trembled. I thought I would go mad. There were rumors that he had run away with some model to Europe or that collectors had killed him for forging antiques, but I never learned the truth. I reached out and covered her hand with mine. Her fingers were icy despite the July heat. "That's in the past," I said gently. "You survived it, became stronger." "I know," Christie smiled weakly. I just didn't expect the past could burst into the present like this. He hasn't changed at all, can you imagine? As if these 12 years simply dropped out of his life. The storm intensified. Raindrops drummed on the porch roof louder and louder, creating a hypnotic rhythm. I pulled my wife closer, feeling her tremble in my arms. "Everything will be fine," I whispered, kissing her temple. "Whatever happens, I'm here." She nodded, pressing closer to me. But something in her posture and how tense her shoulders were, in how she avoided my gaze, made me wary. In 4 years, I had learned every feature of hers, every habit, every movement. She hadn't told me everything. The days dragged on, but something had subtly changed in the rhythm of our lives. Evan began to appear in town with enviable regularity. I heard his name in conversations everywhere. He bought a house on Pine Avenue, opened an architectural firm, became a member of the local yacht club on the lake. For Sleepy Pine Ridge, this was sensational, the appearance of a successful businessman who spent money with royal generosity. Christy tried to behave as usual, but I noticed the changes. She began to stop more often in front of the mirror, spent a long time choosing clothes in the morning, changed her perfume to a more expensive and exquisite one. In the car, when we drove to work, she turned on old songs, the very ones that were popular 12 years ago. Sometimes I caught her thoughtful gaze, directed nowhere, and quiet humming of familiar melodies. Expensive gifts began to appear as if out of thin air. First, it was a box of Swiss chocolate, as a sign of reconciliation with the past, as the note said. Then a silk scarf from a French designer. Sapphire earrings which, as Evan wrote, reminded him of the color of her eyes in the moonlight. Christy blushed, tried to refuse, returned the gifts, but they still ended up either on her desk in the shop or in our home mailbox. I kept silent. I saw how my wife's eyes lit up at the sight of another gift, how she secretly touched the expensive things when she thought no one was watching. In such moments, she seemed to grow younger by several years, becoming the girl she was before Evan's disappearance, carefree, full of hope, looking at the world with wide-open eyes. One morning, I noticed her taking an old box from the wardrobe, the existence of which I wasn't even aware of. Inside were faded photographs, a dried flower, some tickets, fragments of a past life that she had kept all these years. She didn't know I had seen this. She didn't know I heard her crying in the bathroom, clutching an old photograph where she and Evan, young and carefree, laughed against the backdrop of a mountain lake. The town was already whispering. Local gossip lovers eagerly discussed the return of the prodigal groom and placed bets on whether the Rayners' marriage would withstand this test. I heard whispers behind my back, caught sympathetic glances. But what could I do? Forbid my wife from communicating with someone from her past? Make a jealous scene? That would be unworthy of me. The restaurant Highland was considered the best in our small town. I never liked the place, too pretentious for Montana, with its fake alpine decor and exorbitantly inflated prices. But it was here, at a window overlooking the central square, that Christy and Evan sat that evening. I saw their silhouettes through the stained glass, driving past after closing the shop. I parked in the shadow of sprawling pines, turned off the headlights, and remained sitting in the pickup. Summer twilight slowly enveloped the town in a purple haze. The first street lamps were lighting up. Fragments of a jazz melody drifted from the open windows of the restaurant. I think it was Miles Davis. Evan was telling something, gesticulating actively. In the candlelight, his face seemed particularly expressive, regular features, a strong chin, temples slightly touched with gray. He looked like a successful architect from the cover of a professional magazine. His expensive suit fit impeccably, gold cufflinks glinted with every movement of his hand. Christy listened, leaning slightly forward. Her eyes sparkled, color played on her cheeks. She was wearing that emerald dress I had given her for our anniversary. It was strange to see her like this, as if she had grown 10 years younger with that enthusiastic smile on her lips. "One last big job," fragments of a phrase reached me. "After this we can leave, you and I as we always dreamed." Christy shook her head. This is madness, Evan. I'm married, I have a business, which stays afloat only thanks to your husband's military connections, he gently interrupted. You said it yourself. You feel cramped in this little town. You want space for creativity. But remember our plans. A house by the lake, your own art gallery, no worries about the future. I can give you all this. Evan leaned closer. You just need to trust me, once like before. I saw how my wife hesitated. In her posture, in the way she fidgeted with a strand of hair, an old habit that manifested in moments of doubt. An internal struggle was evident. What kind of job? She finally asked. Evan smiled. Even from a distance, that smile seemed predatory, dangerous to me. You'll find out soon. I promise it will be beautiful, like in the movies. They talked for about an hour more. I sat motionless, feeling a cold, professional anger growing inside. I knew this tone, these promises of one last job. I had heard them many times from captured militants. Evan was clearly plotting something, and Christy was becoming part of his plan. When she finally left the house, her gait was slightly uncertain. Apparently, the wine had taken its effect. Evan walked her to the car, and before she got behind the wheel, he leaned down and kissed her, slowly, confidently, as if he had the right to do so. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I wanted to get out, smash that smug face, but I restrained myself. Now it was more important to learn the truth about his plans. The next day, I started my own investigation. Years of service had taught me to work with information, to look for connections, analyze details, assemble a mosaic from disparate facts. First, I checked Evan's company, Blackwood Design architectural firm. On paper, everything looked impeccable. Offices in 3 states, solid authorized capital, an impressive client list. But something didn't add up. Hey, Sean, I called the deputy sheriff. Can you check an address for me? The headquarters of Blackwood Design in Missoula. The answer came an hour later. At the specified address was an abandoned warehouse. The second office in Bozeman turned out to be an empty store. The third didn't exist at all. I delved into searching for information on the internet. 12 years is a long time, but the web keeps memories. I spent almost the whole day in the archives of news sites, browsing old publications. And finally I found it. An article in the Missoula Gazette from 2 years ago, a daring robbery of an armored car. The criminals acted like a military special unit, a clear plan, professional equipment, perfect coordination. Among the witness statements flashed a description of the leader, a tall, well-dressed man with impeccable manners. Another article, a year later, a bank vault break-in in Idaho. The same scheme, the same handwriting. And again, a mention of the mysterious gang leader who infiltrated the local elite several months before the robbery. So that's who you are, I muttered, examining the blurry surveillance camera photo. The quality wasn't the best, but I recognized that profile, that characteristic posture. Evan Blackwood wasn't an architect. He was a professional robber, and a very good one. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I matched the dates of the robberies with the routes of armored vehicles in our area. Once a month, a special convoy transported a large batch of gold bars from the refinery in Helena to the Federal Reserve Vault, and the route passed precisely through our Pine Ridge. So that's it, I leaned back in my chair. That's why you're here. Now everything was falling into place. The strange customers in my shop, the interest in security systems, the series of trial robberies. They were preparing for something big, and judging by Evan's past deeds, they were preparing thoroughly. The main question remained, why did they need my shop? What was so special about it? And then it hit me like an electric shock. The cache with military equipment, illegal weapons from my fallen squad. How did they find out? Only one person besides me had access to this information. Christy, I whispered, what have you done? Chapter 2, Web of Lies. The motel, Last Frontier on the outskirts of Pine Ridge, was exactly the kind of place decent tourists avoid. Peeling paint on the walls, rusted netting of the tennis court, a neon sign with the eternally flickering letter F. Everything suggested that the heyday of this place came when Nixon was still president. But it was here, in room 8, that 4 men gathered whose appearance in town was a harbinger of trouble. Danny Frost, a stocky blonde with military bearing, nervously paced the cramped room. His movements betrayed a professional, economical, measured without a single unnecessary gesture. Marcus Hammer Diaz, a massive Latino with tattoos on his neck, sprawled on the sagging bed, lazily flipping through channels on the ancient television. In the corner of the room, the Hawkins brothers, Nick and Alex, hunched over a laptop, studying some schemes. "A real hole," grumbled Danny, stopping at the window with peeling blinds. "Typical Montana backwater town. 1 main street, 2 bars, a gas station, and a church. What are we doing here?" "Boss said here, so here it is," rumbled Diaz, switching to another channel. "Our job is small, prepare the ground." Nick Hawkins lifted his head from the laptop. "You better take a look at this. I hacked the city's surveillance system. Not many cameras, but they're strategically well positioned, especially around the bank." "What about the gun shop?" Danny approached the table, peering at the screen. "Security at the highest level," answered Alex Hawkins, tapping a pencil on the keyboard. "The owner is a former Marine, a sniper, knows a thing or two about security. Motion sensors, armored showcases, an armory with a safe lock. But the main thing, there's something else there that's not in the official documents." "How do you know?" "Electricity bills." Nick turned the laptop, showing a table with figures. "Consumption is 3 times higher than it should be for a store of that size. Somewhere there is a hidden additional security system, and I'm willing to bet it's guarding something very valuable." Danny nodded. They were all professionals in their field. Behind each of them were years of service in elite units, and now they were using their skills in work of another kind, more profitable work. "How's the infiltration going?" he asked, pulling out a crumpled pack of cigarettes from his pocket. "According to plan," smirked Diaz. "I got a job as a bouncer at the bar across from the shop. The brothers are pretending to be tourists interested in hunting. You're now a realtor interested in real estate in these parts." "And the boss is having a romance with the owner's wife," chuckled Nick. "Works beautifully, nothing to say." "None of your business," cut him off Danny. "Better think about how we're going to proceed. We have 10 days for preparation." There was a knock at the door with the agreed signal, "Too short," one long, "Too short" again. Diaz was instantly at the door, keeping his hand under his jacket. But it was just Evan, as always impeccable in his clothing, only a light sweat on his forehead betraying inner tension. "Gentlemen," he surveyed the room, "how's it progressing?" "According to plan," reported Danny. "We're playing our roles, gathering information, but still don't understand why such complications. We could just—" "No," Evan cut him off sharply. "Everything must be clean, no improvisation. When the time comes, you'll learn the details." He took a thin envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. "Memorize your roles and stay away from each other in public." When the door closed behind Evan, Diaz whistled. "He's kinda nervous today." "Not your concern," Danny cut him off again. "We work strictly according to plan." The morning turned out surprisingly fresh for July in Montana. I was opening the shop when I noticed 2 strangers examining the window display. Brothers, judging by appearance, both tall, blonde, with identical backpacks for hunting gear. "Good morning," the older one greeted when I unlocked the door. "My brother and I are traveling through Montana. Heard you have the best selection of hunting weapons in the area." "Come in." I turned on the lights and the air conditioning system. Something about these guys immediately alerted me. Perhaps the 2 measured, rehearsed movements, perhaps the watchful glances with which they instantly assessed the location of the cameras. "We'd like to look at your rifles," continued the older one. something for big game hunting and more serious optics. Of course, I headed to the rifle stand. We have a rich selection, for example. The next half hour was spent discussing weapon characteristics. The brothers clearly knew the subject. They asked the right questions, spoke knowledgeably. But there was something false, affected about their interest. They seemed to be playing the role of enthusiastic hunters, while occasionally sneaking glances at the surveillance cameras, at the location of emergency exits, at the locks on the showcases. "And where do you keep the really serious weapons?" the younger one inquired casually. "Perhaps you have something special for connoisseurs." "Everything permitted by law is displayed in the hall," I calmly replied. Years of service had taught me to maintain an impassive expression in any situation. The rest is not my specialization. Of course, the older brother raised his hands placatingly. "We're just curious. You know how it is, boyish curiosity." They left without buying anything. I watched them through the window. The brothers walked unhurriedly down the street, talking quietly among themselves. At the crossroads, an inconspicuous gray Jeep with tinted windows was waiting for them. After that, strange visitors began to appear with enviable regularity. A sturdy middle-aged man interested in the alarm system, under the pretext of installing a similar one in his garage. A silver-haired gentleman who spent a long time inquiring about the inner workings of the storage vault. A young couple who photographed the interior more than they were interested in the goods. "Something's not right here." I shared my suspicions with Deputy Sheriff Sean Foster. "Too many curious people in the last week." "Maybe just a coincidence," Sean shrugged. "Small town, any new person stands out." But I felt this was no coincidence. My sniper instinct, honed by years in hot spots, literally screamed, something serious is brewing. And these strange tourists and customers were just the tip of the iceberg. At home, something had changed too. Christy began to stay late after work more often. Need to finish sketches for advertising, meeting with a paint supplier, ordered new display stands. The reasons always sounded convincing, but I knew my wife too well. She never knew how to lie. Her voice would rise slightly, her eyes would wander, avoiding direct gaze. One evening when she again stayed late at the studio, I accidentally noticed her car at the Highland restaurant. At a table by the window, she sat with Evan, leaning towards him so close that their foreheads almost touched. They were arguing heatedly about something. Then he took her hand, and she didn't pull it away. Another time, I woke up in the middle of the night to a quiet sound. Christy was sitting in a chair by the bedroom window, her face illuminated by the bluish light of her phone screen. She was smiling, reading messages, and that smile was so youthful, so carefree, that something inside me broke. I pretended to be asleep when she finally lay down beside me, but all night I listened to her breathing, trying to understand. When did it all go wrong? In the morning, while Christy was in the shower, I took her phone. I knew it was wrong, that it was a violation of our trust, but I couldn't help it. Messages from Evan were everywhere, short romantic notes, photographs, hints at a special future. "Remember the sunset on that lake. Everything will change soon. I never stopped thinking about you." In the favorites folder, I found a photograph, Evan and Christy 12 years ago, young, in love on the shore of a mountain lake. Her hair was longer, his smile was more sincere. They looked at each other as if no one else existed in the world. "Everything okay?" Christy's voice made me start. She stood in the bathroom doorway, wrapped in a terry robe with hair wet from the shower. "Yes," I put the phone back in its place. "Just checking the time." She nodded, but something like embarrassment, like guilt, flashed in her eyes. Did she know what I had seen? Did she guess how much it hurt me each time she furtively checked messages from him? That same evening, the first robbery occurred in town. A small 24-hour store on the outskirts. The criminals acted quickly and professionally. They disabled the cameras, bypassed the alarm, took cash from the register. But strangely, they entered through the ventilation, although they could have simply broken a window. "Looks like they were studying the security system," said Sean Foster, reviewing the report. "Too clean of a job for ordinary robbers." 2 days later, they cleared out a pharmacy. The same scheme, quick, precise, professional. And again, the criminals seemed more interested in the security system than in the loot. They hacked the central computer, downloaded some files. On Friday, they robbed a jewelry store in the shopping center. This time, the cameras managed to capture 4 masked individuals. They moved in sync, like a single organism. Military training, I noted to myself, watching the recording. "What do you think?" asked Sean, as we sat in his office, examining freeze frames from the surveillance cameras. "This is reconnaissance." I tapped my finger on the screen. "They're checking the police response time, studying security systems, preparing for something big." "For what?" "I don't know yet, but they're professionals, former military most likely. Look how they move, how they cover each other. You don't learn this on the street." Sean shook his head. "In our Pine Ridge, what could be so interesting here for professional robbers?" I remained silent. I was thinking about the military equipment hidden in the cache under my shop, about equipment I had removed from my last mission. There were no documents for it, of course. Perhaps this was exactly what brought the bandits to our quiet town. In the evening, closing the shop, I noticed a gray Jeep with tinted windows, the same one in which the strange Hunter brothers had left. The vehicle slowly drove by, as if probing, studying the situation. I automatically memorized the license plate, a habit developed over years of service. 15 minutes later, the same Jeep drove in the opposite direction. A sturdy man with a military haircut sat behind the wheel, the same one who had been interested in the alarm system. Next to him was one of the brothers. They weren't even trying to hide, as if they wanted to be noticed. "The game has begun," I muttered, checking the locks. I felt soon everything would change, and I needed to be ready. The evening was particularly humid. I sat in my pickup across from Evan's house, a stylish modern mansion on Pine Avenue. Christy had arrived there an hour ago, and since then, a subdued light had been burning in the huge panoramic windows of the second floor. I hadn't intended to spy on my wife. Just after another strange call, when she cited a sudden meeting with a designer, something in her voice made me wary. Too many sudden meetings lately, too many half-truths. Evan and Christy appeared on the terrace. In the light of designer garden lamps, their silhouettes seemed unreal, as if cut out of black paper. They sat in rattan chairs, Evan telling something, gesticulating actively. The bottle of wine on the small table between them was almost empty. "The last big job," fragments of a phrase reached me. "After this we can leave, you and I, as we always dreamed." Christy shook her head. "This is madness, Evan. I'm married, I have a business." "Which stays afloat only thanks to your husband's military connections," he gently interrupted. "You said it yourself, you feel cramped in this little town. You want space for creativity." "But remember our plans. A house by the lake, your own art gallery, no worries about the future. I can give you all this." Evan leaned closer. "You just need to trust me, once like before." I saw how my wife hesitated. In her posture, in the way she fidgeted with a strand of hair. An old habit that manifested in moments of doubt. An internal struggle was evident. "What kind of job?" she finally asked. Evan smiled. Even from a distance, that smile seemed predatory, dangerous to me. "You'll find out soon. I promise it will be beautiful, like in the movies." They talked for about an hour more. I sat motionless, feeling a cold, professional anger growing inside. I knew this tone, these promises of one last job. I had heard them many times from captured militants. Evan was clearly plotting something, and Christy was becoming part of his plan. When she finally left the house, her gait was slightly uncertain. Apparently, the wine had taken its effect. Evan walked her to the car, and before she got behind the wheel, he leaned down and kissed her, slowly, confidently, as if he had the right to do so. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I wanted to get out, smash that smug face, but I restrained myself. Now it was more important to learn the truth about his plans. The next day, I started my own investigation. Years of service had taught me to work with information, to look for connections, analyze details, assemble a mosaic from disparate facts. First, I checked Evans' company, Blackwood Design architectural firm. On paper, everything looked impeccable. Offices in 3 states, solid authorized capital, an impressive client list. But something didn't add up. "Hey, Sean," I called the deputy sheriff. "Can you check an address for me? The headquarters of Blackwood Design in Missoula." The answer came an hour later. At the specified address was an abandoned warehouse. The second office in Bozeman turned out to be an empty store. The third didn't exist at all. I delved into searching for information on the internet. 12 years is a long time, but the web keeps memories. I spent almost the whole day in the archives of news sites, browsing old publications. And finally I found it. An article in the Missoula Gazette from 2 years ago, a daring robbery of an armored car. The criminals acted like a military special unit, a clear plan, professional equipment, perfect coordination. Among the witness statements flashed a description of the leader, a tall, well-dressed man with impeccable manners. Another article, a year later, a bank vault break-in in Idaho. The same scheme, the same handwriting. And again, a mention of the mysterious gang leader who infiltrated the local elite several months before the robbery. "So that's who you are," I muttered, examining the blurry surveillance camera photo. The quality wasn't the best, but I recognized that profile, that characteristic posture. Evan Blackwood wasn't an architect. He was a professional robber, and a very good one. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I matched the dates of the robberies with the routes of armored vehicles in our area. Once a month, a special convoy transported a large batch of gold bars from the refinery in Helena to the Federal Reserve Vault, and the route passed precisely through our Pine Ridge. "So that's it," I leaned back in my chair. "That's why you're here." Now everything was falling into place. The strange customers in my shop, the interest in security systems, the series of trial robberies. They were preparing for something big, and judging by Evan's past deeds, they were preparing thoroughly. The main question remained: why did they need my shop? What was so special about it? And then it hit me like an electric shock. The cache with military equipment, illegal weapons from my fallen squad. How did they find out? Only one person besides me had access to this information. "Christy," I whispered, "what have you done?" Chapter 3: The Price of Betrayal. The night before the robbery was starless, ink dark. I lay on our bed, pretending to be asleep, while listening to Christy moving nervously around the room. Her shadow darted across the walls like a trapped bird. She would sit by the window, then press the phone to her ear, then freeze above my sleeping figure, as if wanting to wake me and confess everything. The clock on the bedside table showed 2:38. In 22 minutes she was supposed to act. I had intercepted Evan's message with the detailed plan. "It's simple, sunshine," he wrote. "You'll disable the alarm, open the cache. My guys will take the weapons. No one will get hurt." Christy silently descended the stairs, skipping the creaky third step. I waited until the front door closed behind her and then got up. My body seemed to have returned to combat mode. All movements became economical, precise, all senses heightened to the limit. I didn't follow her. I knew where she was heading. Instead, I took the phone and dialed Sean. "It's starting," I said. "Be ready, but don't intervene until I give the signal." "Mike, what's going on?" Sean's voice was sleepy, but notes of alarm were already breaking through. "You'll find out soon, just trust me." In the accurate shot shop, it smelled of gun oil, leather, and gunpowder, scents that had become synonymous with home for me. I entered through the emergency exit, the existence of which only I knew about. A secret panel in the wall of the back room slid aside, and I slipped into a dark corridor. Muffled voices came from the sales floor, Christie and someone else. I carefully peeked out from behind a shelf with ammunition. In the dim moonlight penetrating through the showcases, I saw my wife directing a flashlight beam at the safe lock of the secret room. Dark silhouettes loomed beside her. Evan's team moved precisely, in sync, like a single organism. "Wow," whispered one of them, examining the revealed arsenal. "A real treasure." "Quiet," cut him off a stocky blonde whom I identified as Danny Frost. "We work quickly. We have 8 minutes." They acted like professionals. Each knew their task. Christie stood aside, hugging herself by the shoulders as if she were cold. Her face betrayed an internal struggle. She was clearly beginning to realize the monstrosity of her betrayal. "Done," Danny snapped the last case shut. "Let's go." At that moment, the front door of the shop opened. Evan stood on the threshold, elegant even at 3 in the morning, in a dark coat with a raised collar, like the main character of a film noir. His face, illuminated by the ghostly moonlight, seemed carved from marble. "You're late," whispered Christie. "No, dear," he came closer. "I came just in time. Now we need to talk." Danny and the others disappeared with the weapons, dissolving into the night like ghosts. Evan took Christie by the hand and led her to the sales floor. The moonlight, penetrating through the showcases, transformed their silhouettes into grotesque shadows on the walls. "You know what's the hardest thing in my work?" he asked, seating her on a chair by the counter. "Not planning, not execution. The hardest thing is people. You never know who you can trust." "What do you mean?" "I lied to you, Chris." His voice became harsh, devoid of any charm. "There will be no house by the lake, no new life. I needed you only to get to these weapons." She looked at him with wide eyes, not believing her ears. The man before her was no longer the Evan she had once loved. This was a stranger with the eyes of a professional predator. "Tomorrow we'll take the convoy with the gold," he continued. "Heavy weaponry will give us an advantage, and you're now an accomplice. The police are already on their way here, an anonymous call about a break-in at a gun shop. They'll find traces of a break-in, disabled alarm, and an empty cache. Who do you think they'll suspect first?" "You can't." "I can, dear. And you know what? 12 years ago I didn't run away because of a setup. Just a lucrative deal came up in Europe, and you were a tie that dragged me down. Too proper, too domestic. I love freedom more than I love you." Christie turned so pale that in the moonlight she looked like a ghost. Somewhere in the distance, the wail of police sirens could be heard. Evan smiled and pulled out a gun. "Come, dear, I still need you for a little while." I stepped out of the shadows, holding my gun with both hands, the classic military stance. "Put down the weapon, Evan." His reaction was instantaneous. He spun around, in one motion pulling Christie in front of him as a shield. The barrel of his gun pressed against her temple. "And here's our sleeping beauty," he smirked. "And I thought your wife had done an excellent job of drugging you." Christie cried out, her eyes widening with horror. "Mike, I didn't want to. He said it was just a sleeping pill that—" "Shut up," Evan barked, pressing the gun harder against her temple. "One more step, hero, and your beautiful wife will need a plastic surgeon to put her face back together." The distance between us was about 10 meters, enough for an accurate shot, but Evan was skillfully using Christie as cover. A stalemate situation. The sirens were getting closer. "Here's what we'll do," Evan said calmly. "You'll put down your gun now and let us leave, and I'll release your wife, say, outside the town. She talks too much to take her with me." "You know that's a lie," I spoke evenly, not taking my eyes off his face. "You'll get rid of her as soon as you get out of town." Christie sobbed. Tears flowed down her cheeks, smearing her mascara. She looked small and fragile in Evan's hands, a frightened child who had realized the consequences of a terrible mistake. Something changed in Evan's eyes. A shadow of annoyance flashed. He clearly hadn't expected to meet me here, and his plan was beginning to fall apart. "Your people are now loading weapons into a car 2 blocks away," I said. "In 5 minutes, the police will cordon off all exits from town. You won't get away, Evan." The sirens sounded very close now. Evan jerked, tightening his grip on Christy. "Then I have all the more reason not to spare your precious wife." His finger tensed on the trigger. "Goodbye, hero." Time seemed to slow down. 20 years of training hadn't gone to waste. I saw his intention a fraction of a second before he began to act. My shot sounded simultaneously with Christie's piercing scream. The bullet entered Evan's shoulder precisely, spinning him and throwing him away from my wife. He collapsed to the floor, dropping his gun. Christie fell to her knees, breathing heavily, as if not believing she was still alive. I ran to Evan and turned him onto his stomach, twisting his arm behind his back. He groaned in pain but didn't try to resist. "You should have shot me," he wheezed. "Why didn't you kill me?" "You don't deserve an easy death," I replied, putting handcuffs on him, which I always carried with me. "You'll answer for everything, for every guard killed, for every life maimed." Police with weapons at the ready appeared in the doorway of the shop. Sean Foster was the first to rush into the room, assessing the situation with the instantaneous glance of a professional, and lowered his gun. "Arrest him," I nodded toward Evan. "Attempted murder, armed robbery, kidnapping, and that's just the beginning of the list." While the police read Evan his rights, I approached Christy. She was still sitting on the floor, hugging her knees, rocking back and forth like a child. "Mike," she whispered, not raising her eyes. I didn't know. He said no one would get hurt." I looked at her, the woman I loved more than life, the woman who had betrayed me and our family, the woman who had nearly cost me everything. Emotions raged inside like a hurricane, but outwardly I remained calm. "You're an accomplice to armed robbery," I said quietly. "And weapons theft, I'm sorry." She raised her tear-filled eyes to me. "Will you turn me into the police?" I hesitated, looking into those green eyes that had once been my whole world. "No," I finally answered, "but our marriage is over. I'll file for divorce as soon as this case is closed." Her face contorted with pain, and she began to cry again, this time silently, as if all strength had left her. I turned away and walked to Sean, who was already organizing the pursuit of the remaining gang members. "All exits from town are blocked," he reported. "They don't have much chance of escape." "They'll go through the mountain trail behind the old sawmill," I said. "It's the only path that's not on the maps. I'm heading there." "Mike," Sean grabbed my sleeve. "It's dangerous. They're armed to the teeth and they have nothing to lose." "Neither do I replied, freeing my arm. "And I know these mountains better than they do." I walked out into the night, leaving behind the light of police flashers, the bustle of arrests, and the quiet sobs of the woman I had once considered my destiny. A hunt awaited me ahead. And this time I wasn't just a sniper, I was a hunter. The mountain road wound between pine trees, gravel glistening in the headlights of my pickup. The rain, which had started an hour ago, had turned it into a dangerous, slippery mess. Steep slopes descended downward into the inky darkness of the forest canyon. One wrong turn, and no one would ever find your car under the thickness of a mountain stream. This is precisely why I knew they would drive carefully. 3 heavy SUVs, loaded with weapons and people, couldn't develop high speed on such a surface. I had the advantage, knowledge of the terrain and a light vehicle. 2 miles from the fork where the mountain trail connected to the main road, I found the perfect position. A tree felled by a storm had blocked half the path, leaving only a narrow passage where vehicles would inevitably have to slow down. I took a rifle from the trunk, good old Remington 700, the very one I had shown to Will Gorman that morning. I set up the bipod, lay down behind the tree, and peered through the optical sight. The rain intensified, but for an experienced sniper, this was no obstacle. I had long learned to make adjustments for wind and precipitation. I didn't have to wait long. First, I heard the rumble of powerful engines. Then in the lightning flash, I saw them. Black SUVs moving in a column along the muddy road. Danny drove first, followed by the Hawkins brothers with Diaz closing the column. I aimed at the front vehicle, not at the windshield. I didn't want to kill them as strong as the temptation was. Instead, I shot at the engine once, twice, 3 times. The black Jeep jerked, steam billowed from under the hood. Danny braked sharply, causing the second car to nearly crash into him. A short pause ensued. They were trying to understand what was happening. Then the doors swung open, and the fighters jumped out, holding their weapons at the ready. "This is the police," I shouted through the megaphone which I had prudently brought along. "Drop your weapons and lie face down on the ground. URSURROUNDED." Of course, they didn't believe it. Danny shouted something to Diaz, who opened fire in my direction, randomly, not seeing the target. Bullets sank into the wet wood behind which I was hiding with a squelching sound. I fired again, this time aiming at Diaz's legs. The bullet passed through the fleshy part of his thigh and he collapsed, dropping his automatic rifle. The others ducked behind the cars, trying to determine where the fire was coming from. "I repeat, drop your weapons," I shouted. "The next bullet be in the leg." But they were professionals, not the kind who surrender without a fight. The Hawkins brothers opened fire with 2 automatic rifles, forcing me to press myself to the ground. They were clearly trying to cover Danny, who in short sprints was approaching the forest, apparently intending to flank me. I changed position, sliding between wet trees like a ghost. Years of training in jungles and deserts had taught me to move silently even in such conditions. I needed to hold out a little longer. Somewhere in the distance, the roar of police helicopters could already be heard. The firefight continued for about 20 minutes. I methodically drove them out of their cover, herding them into the open space of the road. The younger Hawkins took a bullet in the shoulder, Danny in the thigh. Only the older Hawkins remained unharmed, hiding in the back of the last Jeep. "It's over," I shouted when the helicopters appeared over the mountain pass, illuminating the scene with bright searchlights. "Surrender." A shot rang out and something hot seared my cheek. Blood flowed down my neck, mixing with rainwater. The older Hawkins had finally spotted my hiding place and was now firing targeted shots. The bullet passed a millimeter from my carotid artery. Just a bit more, and I would have bled out in minutes. There was no point in risking any further. I carefully aimed and fired. The bullet entered the shooter's shoulder of his shooting arm, causing him to drop his weapon. The next moment, the area filled with Special Forces soldiers jumping from helicopters. "Everyone down, hands behind your head," commands rang out. I slowly stood up, holding the rifle barrel upward so the Special Forces could see. I was not an enemy. Sean Foster, seeing me, waved. "Mike, damn it, I thought you were dead." "Almost," I touched my bleeding cheek. "But these guys shoot worse than they boast." Sean came closer, examining my wound. "You need a doctor." Later, I nodded toward the detained fighters who were already being handcuffed. "What about the weapons?" "All in the third Jeep," Sean pointed to the SUV, in the trunk of which metal cases were visible. "And it seems something else interesting. They managed to take a safe from an armored car, the very one that was supposed to pass through town tomorrow." "So they were ahead of schedule," I shook my head. "Smart." The rain gradually subsided, leaving behind the fresh smell of wet pine needles and earth. Dawn colored the eastern horizon in a pale pink hue. A new day was beginning with a clean slate. "What about the convoy?" I asked, getting into the police car. "2 guards killed, 3 wounded," Sean replied grimly. "Your wife gave a statement, told everything, how Blackwood manipulated her, how he forced her to reveal information about the weapons cache." He paused. She really believed no one would get hurt. I remained silent. Christie's naivety had cost the lives of 2 guards, not to mention our marriage. Believed no one would get hurt, as if a professional robber would let witnesses go, as if people protecting their property wouldn't resist. She's facing 5 to 10 years, Sean continued. But considering her cooperation with the investigation and sincere confession, I don't want to talk about it. I turned to the window, watching as the first rays of the sun colored the mountain peaks in gold. The day turned out to be incredibly long. Interrogations, reports, medical examination. The wound on my cheek required 6 stitches, but the doctors assured me the scar would be barely noticeable, as if I cared about that. Christie was kept in the next office. I heard her voice through the wall, quiet, broken, full of remorse. She told everything without holding back. How Evan had found her through social media, how he began to establish contact, gradually reviving old feelings. How at first he just asked for information about the town, then about the shop, then about the cash. I didn't want to betray my husband, her trembling voice reached me. I thought I could protect him, that if I helped Evan he would leave Mike alone. Such naivety. What an astonishing, childish misunderstanding of the very nature of evil. And this woman had been my wife for 4 years. How could I not have noticed this fundamental weakness in her? By evening, they finally released me. Sean offered to drive me home, but I refused. I needed to walk, to feel solid ground under my feet, to breathe in the fresh mountain air. Pine Ridge seemed unusually lively. News of the shootout and the arrest of the gang of robbers had spread like wildfire. Groups of people gathered in the streets discussing what had happened. When I passed by, conversations would quiet down and curious, sometimes sympathetic gazes would be directed at me. Small town. News spreads quickly here, especially if it concerns betrayal. The house was empty and quiet. I walked through the rooms as if seeing them for the first time, so many traces of Christie's presence. Her paintings on the walls, her ceramic dishes in the kitchen, her scent in the bedroom. All this now seemed foreign, poisoned by lies. I sat down at the kitchen table and took a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet, old Jack Daniels, a gift from Sean last Christmas. I poured it into a glass but didn't drink. I just looked at the amber liquid, inhaling the tart aroma, thinking about how quickly what you've built for years can collapse. Christie was sentenced to 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. It could have been much worse, but the judge took into account her cooperation with the investigation, lack of a criminal past, and the fact that she herself had nearly become a victim. Evan Blackwood was less fortunate. 25 years of maximum security for organizing an armed robbery, the murder of 2 guards, and attempted kidnapping. His accomplices received from 15 to 20 years each. The first letter from Christie came a month after the trial. A white envelope without a stamp. Sean passed it on, shrugging embarrassedly. She really asked, "Dear Mike, I don't know if you'll read this. You'll probably throw it away without even opening the envelope, and I would understand. I don't deserve even that. Every night I dream of the moment when I entered the alarm code of your shop. I hear my footsteps down the dark corridor, the click of the lock, the creak of the door. I wake up in a cold sweat and realize this is not a dream. This is what I did. I betrayed you." Evan appeared like a ghost from the past, opened old wounds, reminded me of the dreams of youth. I allowed myself to believe in a fairy tale, of a second chance, of our old love, of a happy ending. How foolish. You saved me, not just from death, but from an even bigger mistake. And I didn't even get to say thank you. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I will write to you every day, even if you never answer. Forever yours, Christie. I sat in my office, looking at the familiar handwriting, neat, round letters with a slight tilt to the right. Outside the window it was raining again, just like that night. Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance. I carefully folded the letter and put it in the desk drawer with the others unopened. Perhaps someday I would find the strength to read them all, but not today. Today I would just go on living, as they taught in the Marine Corps, step by step, day by day. And perhaps one day the wound in my heart would stop bleeding. For now I have the shop, I have friends, I have the mountains around as eternal and unchanging as always, and that's not a little. If you enjoyed this story, support me with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments. Thank you.